My family staged an intervention at Thanksgiving to force me to pay $78K for my sister's wedding. My dad had a notarized contract. My mom threw my plate in the trash. I said one sentence and walked out. Now the wedding is canceled and they just found out what I actually did. My name is Ryan Callahan. I'm 33 years old. I work in financial compliance. I live alone. I drive a used Subaru, and I have never, not once in my adult life, been late on a bill. I tell you that not to brag. I tell you that because it matters to the story. It matters because my family saw my reliability the way a parasite sees a healthy host, not as something to protect, as something to consume. By the time my father slid the notarized contract across the Thanksgiving table at 3:47 in the afternoon, I already understood this dinner had never been about gratitude, turkey, or family. It was a trap dressed up in centerpieces and candlelight, catered by my mother's best casserole dishes, and attended by 50 people who had all, apparently, been briefed before I arrived. My father sat at the head of the table like a judge behind a bench. My mother stood at the far end with her arms crossed, a woman who had spent 4 decades perfecting the art of making cruelty look like concern. And my sister, Cassidy, my 28-year-old sister who had been engaged for 7 months, sat 2 seats to my left in a white satin headband and a literal rhinestone tiara, smiling the smile of someone who has already cashed a check they haven't written yet. There were 50 people in that room. Uncles, aunts, cousins, in-laws, church friends, neighbors who'd known us since I was 9 years old, the kind of audience my parents had always performed for. My father tapped the paper. "Pay the $78,000 for your sister's wedding," he said, "or leave this house and don't come back." My mother straightened up like she was chairing a board meeting. "Every person at this table agrees," she announced to the room. "You owe her this." Cassidy tilted her head, diamond earrings catching the chandelier light. "I already booked the venue under your credit card," she said, like she was correcting a minor scheduling error. "So really, you're just making this harder than it needs to be." I didn't reach for the pen. My mother walked over to my plate, picked it up, and dumped my entire Thanksgiving dinner into the trash can by the kitchen door. The sound it made, ceramic clunking against the inside of the bin, cranberry sauce hitting the bag, was so precise and deliberate that a few relatives flinched. "Freeloaders don't eat here," she said. My father calmly lifted my car keys from the kitchen counter. I had set them there when I walked in, the way I always did, and tucked them into his shirt pocket. "The car stays until you do the right thing." 50 people stared at me. I want you to sit with that for a second. 50 people. People I had grown up around. People who had attended my high school graduation, my grandmother's funeral, every Christmas for 20 years. They all sat in complete silence while my parents publicly stripped away my dinner and my transportation and demanded I sign a legal document. Not one of them said anything. I stood up. I buttoned my coat slowly, the way you button a coat when your hands are shaking but you refuse to let anyone see it shake. I looked at my mother, whose face was arranged in the triumphant expression of a woman who believed she had finally cornered something difficult, and I said one sentence. "You might want to call the venue before you call me ungrateful." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I walked out. The cold hit me at the front door like a slap, but I welcomed it. I stood in the driveway for exactly 4 seconds, breathing, understanding I had just detonated something I could never undetonate, and then I started walking. That was 3 weeks ago. They've called 200 times since. My father left 36 voicemails, sobbing, "The wedding is canceled." And they just found out what I actually did. Let me back up. I'd been the responsible one in my family for as long as I can remember, which sounds like a compliment until you understand what it actually means in a household like mine. The Callahan family ran on a very simple dynamic. Cassidy was the feeling. I was the function. She was the dream. I was the plan to fund it. She was the event. I was the cleanup crew. My parents had 2 children and loved us in completely different currencies. For Cassidy, love was unlimited. Verbal, physical, financial, unconditional. For me, love was transactional. It showed up when I was useful and evaporated the moment I set a limit. I didn't fully understand this until I was in my late 20s, and by then I'd already spent years absorbing the cost of their hierarchy without calling it what it was. The used car my father bought me at 16, he referenced it 6 times at that Thanksgiving table like it was still accruing interest. The year I lived at home after college working and paying rent while Cassidy had her tuition and apartment covered without mention never came up once. The loan I received to help with a semester's books, $800, almost 12 years earlier, had apparently been quietly promoted to a line item on some invisible family ledger I'd never been shown. My mother had a talent for that kind of selective accounting. She remembered every dollar that moved toward me and forgot every dollar that moved through me. I had been in financial compliance for 6 years by then. I reviewed expense exposure for a mid-sized regional bank. I understood, probably better than anyone at that dinner table, how invisible systems of debt worked, how framing determined liability, how people manipulated documentation to make one party's generosity look like another party's obligation. What I hadn't understood until I stood in that driveway without my car keys was that I had been inside one of those systems my entire life. I spent the first night at a Hampton Inn 8 miles away because I refused to go back for the keys. I ordered room service fries at 12:30 12:30 a.m. and sat on the edge of the bed in my coat, still wearing it, staring at the beige wall and listening to the highway noise outside. My phone had gone feral. My mother, 11 calls. My father, 9. Cassidy, 6. An aunt I hadn't spoken to in 2 years suddenly found my number. A cousin who had watched my plate hit the trash and said nothing felt suddenly compelled to reach out. I screenshotted all of it, forwarded everything to a secure cloud folder I use for work documentation. Compliance training is mostly just pattern recognition. Document first, react second, never act on emotion when you can act on evidence. By 9 a.m. And I had replacement car keys ordered. Every account that had ever intersected with my family frozen or flagged for monitoring, emergency contacts updated at my doctor's office, and an email drafted to HR at my company, not yet sent, just drafted, that said simply, there may be retaliatory contact from family members involving false financial claims, flagging proactively per protocol. I knew my parents. When their private leverage fails, they escalate to public stages. I sent the email at 9:47 a.m. My manager called at 10:12. Whatever is happening, he said, we've got you. I had to hold the phone away from my ear for a second and breathe through my nose because I was not going to cry over a sentence from my boss that my parents had never once said to me. The voicemail started warm and curdled fast. My mother's first message was polished grief. She said I had humiliated our family in front of Christian people on a holy holiday, which was a remarkable reframe of what had actually occurred, given that she was the one who threw food in the trash and called her son a freeloader. My father's early messages were authority-based. He told me I was being irrational. He told me to come home and we'll sort this out like adults, which meant come home and agree to our terms in private so we can call it your decision. Cassidy sent a voice note crying so convincingly that if I hadn't grown up watching her perform, I might have believed it. Not once, not in any of the messages, not in any of the texts, did anyone say, we were wrong. Every expression of pain was logistical. The venue was an issue. The timeline was collapsing. The groom's family was asking questions. My silence was creating problems. Their grief was about consequences, not conscience. 3 days later, my cousin Derek sent me screenshots from the family group chat. My parents had posted a statement saying I was going through something, that I had misunderstood a loving family request, and that everyone should pray for reconciliation. Cassidy added a broken heart emoji. She wrote, I still love my brother. I stared at that message for a long time because it was elegant in the way that only truly cynical manipulation can be elegant. They were constructing a public record in real time. Me, unstable and tragic, them, patient and heartbroken. That was when I understood that silence alone wasn't enough. Silence had protected them for decades. I built a timeline, not an emotional journal, not a revenge list, a professional incident timeline. Dates, amounts, witnesses, flagged accounts, screenshots, text logs, voicemails, and one bank event from 2 years earlier that had never fully left my mind. 2 years before that Thanksgiving, someone had attempted to add themselves as an authorized user on one of my personal credit accounts. The bank froze it, opened an internal review, and gave me enough information to understand the request had originated from someone in my family circle. I never found out who. I never got an apology. I got silence, then blame, then a suggestion that I was overreacting about a misunderstanding. I had filed it away. It sat in my timeline now like a cornerstone. The more I built the document, the more the architecture of the last decade became impossible to ignore. This wasn't a series of misunderstandings. It was a system. Madison wanted something. My parents framed it as family duty. I resisted. They escalated shame until compliance seemed less painful than resistance. Repeat. College housing funds I contributed without being asked. A car loan I co-signed that I was never supposed to actually cover. Holiday gifts charged to a card I hadn't authorized. A cash advance that had quietly stopped being called a loan at some point and started being called a gift retroactively. Stacked together, the pattern was undeniable. The strange part, and this was the part that took me a few days to process, was that once I saw it clearly, I stopped feeling crazy. That's what these systems depend on. They need you to experience your own memory as disloyalty. They need each incident to feel isolated, so you never zoom out far enough to see the map. I had spent years explaining away everything. Bad timing, stress, miscommunication, family is complicated. I wasn't explaining anything away anymore. Then I got a message from an unknown number. It read, Hi Ryan, my name is Marcus Ellery. I'm Tyler's cousin. I think your family may have used your name with my aunt and uncle. We need to talk before they lose more money. Read that again. Before they lose more money. That sentence told me something I hadn't expected. I wasn't the only person my family had dragged into their performance. I met Marcus Ellery at a coffee shop in Fort Mill the next afternoon. He arrived looking like someone who had been running on 4 hours of sleep for a week. Within 10 minutes, I understood why. 2 years earlier, Cassidy had convinced Marcus to advance a luxury rental deposit for a bachelorette trip, promising reimbursement within 30 days. She never paid him back. My mother later characterized it as a misunderstanding between young people. Marcus was 36 at the time. He had receipts, text confirmations, and a Venmo request texts she had never responded to. He hadn't come to rescue me. He had come because he recognized a pattern he had already paid for. He pulled up his phone and showed me a text thread between his aunt, Tyler's mother, and my mother. My mother had told them I was managing a family trust disbursement, that I had already earmarked funds for the wedding, that my hesitation at Thanksgiving was purely about timing and tax efficiency. I almost laughed. I'm a compliance analyst at a regional bank. My grandparents left furniture and a set of dishes, not a trust. There was no disbursement. There was no earmark. There was no tax strategy. My mother had looked Tyler's family in the eyes and invented a financial architecture that featured me as a silent benefactor who was simply too humble to discuss my own generosity. I kept reading. Avery prefers not to discuss money publicly, but he's assured us the major costs are covered. I had assured no one of the sort. What have they already paid? I asked Marcus. He exhaled slowly. My aunt and uncle advanced $22,000 for catering and guest accommodations. They were told your contribution would cover venue, decor, and photography. Tyler signed vendor contracts he believed were backed by both families. When the venue flagged the payment issue, your mother told them you were having some kind of episode and had impulsively frozen things. The anger that moved through me wasn't hot, it was architectural. The kind of anger that doesn't throw things, it catalogs them. Does Tyler know? I said. Marcus nodded. He knows something is wrong. He doesn't know how wrong. His parents are embarrassed. My aunt feels like she walked into a scam. There was that word. Scam. I sat with it. It fit too well. I'll show them everything I can prove, I said. Nothing I can't. Marcus leaned back for the first time since he sat down and looked like a man releasing a breath he'd been holding for weeks. That's more than anyone else in this situation has offered. On the drive home, I thought about how many years I had spent trying not to make my parents look bad, how many times I had softened the truth to preserve their reputation, how many family dinners I had survived by staying small and quiet, how many times I had chosen their comfort over my own credibility. There's a word for what I'd been doing for a decade: covering. I had been covering for people who would not hesitate, who had not hesitated, to use my name in front of Tyler's family without my knowledge or consent. Loyalty without truth is just unpaid labor. That evening, I drafted a message to Tyler and his parents. Short, clean, zero emotional debris. I wrote that I had recently learned my name, and financial standing had been referenced in representations concerning Cassidy's wedding, that several of those representations were inaccurate, and that if they wished, I was prepared to share documentation clarifying my non-involvement in any financial commitments related to the event. I read it 6 times, then I sent it. Tyler's father replied 31 minutes later. He asked to meet in person the following morning. His last line was, "If what you're telling us is accurate, this has gone well beyond a family disagreement." He was right. We met at a private room at a country club restaurant Tyler's family used for business, their choice, which told me they were treating this with the seriousness it deserved. They arrived first. Tyler looked like a man who had not slept properly in days. His mother sat with perfect posture, but her hands were folded too tightly on the table. His father was the kind of man who has spent a long career being patient and professional, and who saves his fury for the moments it will actually land. He said, "Start at the beginning," so I did. I told them I had never offered to fund the wedding. I had never managed a trust. I had never authorized any vendor, any arrangement, or any contract to carry my name or my financial standing. I showed them the flagged account history from 2 years prior, the timeline I had built, the message logs, the email to HR, the voicemail record. I told them about Thanksgiving, the notarized contract, the 50 witnesses, the plate in the trash, the confiscated keys, the demand that I sign under public pressure. Tyler stared at the table for most of it. His mother watched me the whole time with the focused attention of someone deciding whether grief makes people exaggerate. I understood. I didn't need her to believe me emotionally. I needed her to believe the documents. Facts have a texture that fabrications don't. Dates lined up, amounts aligned, timelines cohered. When I finished, Tyler's father had stopped looking skeptical and started looking like a man who had been told his manners were being mistaken for weakness. "Denise told us you were private about money," he said, "that you disliked discussing your own generosity. My mother has always been creative when my wallet is involved," I said. Then Tyler unlocked his phone and played a voicemail Cassidy had left him the week before. In it, she told him I was dragging my feet on the release, and that if he handled his family, she would handle mine. Tyler's mother closed her eyes when it ended. Tyler finally looked at me directly. "Did Cassidy know there was no trust?" "She knew enough," I said. "You don't need to know every detail to know the money isn't yours to promise." He nodded once, slowly, like the sentence had weight. Tyler's father stood up, stepped outside, and made 3 phone calls. When he came back, the energy in the room had changed at a cellular level. "The catering payment scheduled for next week is suspended," he said. "The accommodation block is suspended. My attorney is reviewing all representations made by your family to ours. Until that review is complete, there is no wedding." His wife added very quietly, "And there will be no further private conversations with Denise." She said it without drama, which made it land harder than drama could have. My family found out before I left the parking lot. Cassidy called 14 times in 9 minutes. My mother texted, "How dare you go to them?" My father, "You have 10 minutes to fix this before before I make it worse. Then the family group chat detonated. Tyler's mother had sent a short message to relatives on both sides. Due to serious misrepresentations concerning wedding funding and prior financial commitments, all current wedding expenditures are under immediate review. Please do not make further payments or arrangements until legal and financial questions are resolved. It was precise. It was devastating. It was impossible to spin. My parents had built their whole operation on controlling who knew what and when. A calm, factual message from the groom's family to an extended network was outside every defensive play they had. Cassidy showed up at my apartment that night. She pounded on my door hard enough that my downstairs neighbor opened his door and stared up the stairwell. I didn't let her in. I stepped into the hallway and pulled the door shut behind me. "Do you understand what you've done?" she hissed. Mascara already gone, tiara confidence entirely absent. "No," I said. "I exposed what you did." "Are lies," she snapped, and then froze. That one syllable, "our." She had handed me more in that word than any lawyer could have asked for. For the first time in my life, Cassidy didn't look untouchable. She looked terrified. "Please," she whispered, "please don't let them think I did this alone." There was something different in her voice. Not performance, not strategy, fear, and underneath it, something that had maybe always been there and never had room to surface: shame. I looked at her for a long moment. "You didn't do it alone," I said, "but you did do it." She slid down the hallway wall and covered her face. "They told me you always come through," she whispered, and there it was, the family creed, spoken out loud for the first time. Ryan absorbs it. Ryan fixes it. Ryan pays. "Not anymore," I said. I went inside, locked the door. The phone rang itself into exhaustion. The collapse accelerated the way structural failures do, slowly, then all at once. Once the groom's family pulled the financial review, my parents lost the one thing that made their whole system function: control over who knew what, so they escalated. My father called my company's main reception line and told them there was an urgent financial misconduct issue involving one of their employees, meaning me. Security flagged it immediately. HR had it within the hour. 2 hours later, my mother emailed one of my senior directors, found his name on LinkedIn apparently, claiming I had embezzled from relatives and was fabricating stories to avoid repayment. That might have worked if I hadn't briefed my company 6 days earlier. Instead, my director replied once, "Please direct any further personal allegations through counsel." It was 8 words. It was a wall. My parents had spent years believing that institutions operated the way families did, that confidence could override documentation, that a convincing story told loudly enough would eventually become the record. They didn't understand what it looked like when a real institution stopped tolerating them. That evening, my father's voicemails changed in character for the first time. The authority was gone. What replaced it was something I had never heard from him before: panic that had run out of fuel and become something rawer than that. 36 voicemails over 2 days, some demanding, some bargaining, some almost incoherent at the edges. In one of them, he said, "You don't understand what this is going to cost us." I listened to that line 3 times. It was the closest he had ever come to understanding me. He still didn't mean my cost. He meant his own, but it was movement. Meanwhile, relatives began contacting me privately. An uncle admitted he had always thought it was harder on you than it should have been. A cousin mentioned that my mother had once asked whether he would be willing to encourage Ryan to see things more cooperatively regarding a cosign request I had declined. My Aunt Patricia, who had been sitting 4 seats from me when my plate hit the trash and had not moved a muscle, sent me a message that said I should have stood up. I didn't. That was wrong. It still matters that I didn't. Toxic systems survive on silent bystanders almost as much as they survive on the people running them. Then I did the thing my parents had never imagined I would do. I stopped protecting their image. I did not post on social media. I did not rage publicly. I sent one email to every relative who had attended Thanksgiving, plus the few family members directly involved in the aftermath. I attached a short statement and supporting documentation. I wrote that because conflicting accounts of recent events were circulating, I was sharing limited documentation establishing that I had not agreed to fund Cassidy's wedding, that financial representations had been made in my name without my consent, that retaliatory contact had since been directed at my employer, and that going forward, all communication should occur in writing. Attached, screenshots of the contract, the bank flag from 2 years prior, my mother's email to my director, and the HR preservation notice. No insults, no editorializing, no adjectives, just proof. The effect was immediate and irreversible. You could feel the family's center of gravity shift in real time. People who had enjoyed watching me get cornered at Thanksgiving found it considerably less enjoyable when they understood they had been seated at a public coercion ritual and would be treated as witnesses after the fact. My parents began receiving messages, not of support, but of distance. My grandfather's older brother, 81 years old, a retired pastor whose opinion functioned as family law, called my father and told him, "You are not disciplining a son, you are extorting one." I heard about that call from 4 different cousins within 2 hours. The financial damage landed like a second wave. Once vendors began cross-referencing communications against what they'd actually been promised, the cancellations cascaded. The venue kept a significant portion of the deposit. The floral contract had a non-refundable custom sourcing fee already billed. The live band had a penalty clause. The luxury tent company wanted full cancellation charges because installation had already been scheduled and deposits on materials had been placed. When everything was totaled, my parents were looking at over $100,000 in sunk costs, penalties, private reimbursements, and obligations they had assumed would simply dissolve the moment I signed. Their entire operation had one structural flaw. It required my compliance to arrive before the paperwork did. I had walked out before I signed anything. The paperwork caught up. My mother came to my apartment alone one evening. No event preparation, no performance costume, just a wool coat, swollen eyes, and the look of a woman encountering consequences for the first time as something real rather than theoretical. I didn't invite her in. I stood in the hallway with the door closed behind me. "Please stop this," she whispered. I almost asked her which part she meant. The truth, the documentation, the part where I declined to pay for consequences I hadn't caused. "I didn't start this," I said. She swallowed hard. "We were trying to help Cassidy." "No," I said. "You were trying to use me." Her face broke, not from guilt, but from the sheer cleanliness of the sentence. She couldn't find the angle to argue with it. Then she said the thing I had been waiting to hear my entire adult life. "We handled it wrong." Not, "We were wrong." Handled it wrong. Even her apology was logistical. "That's why this happened," I said. "Because to you, cruelty is just a strategy problem." She reached for my arm. I stepped back. "You told 50 people I owed Cassidy my life. You dumped my food in the trash. You took my car. You called my employer. You told another family I had committed funds I never committed. You don't need forgiveness right now. You need reality." She left without another word. 3 days later, Cassidy's wedding was officially canceled. Not postponed, canceled. Tyler ended the engagement through attorneys and a single email. In light of material misrepresentation and irreparable loss of trust, I do not see a path forward. My parents had wanted to force me into a lifelong financial obligation. Instead, they had collapsed their favorite child's engagement so completely that it required attorneys to dismantle it. The person they had spent decades protecting needed a lawyer to survive the protection. The last time I saw Cassidy, we met at the lake park near where we grew up. November had stripped everything back to branches and flat gray sky, which felt appropriate. She sat on a bench without the headband, without the tiara, without any of the practiced ease she'd worn her entire life like a second skin. She looked like a version of herself that only existed when our parents weren't in the room and didn't yet know how to function without an audience. When I sat down, she didn't perform. "They're blaming me now," she said. I believed her instantly. Families built on scapegoats don't reform when they collapse. They just reassign the weight. She told me vendors were furious. Tyler's family had cut contact. Relatives were quietly pulling back from our parents, and our father had started using a phrase she said made her sick, that Cassidy had misunderstood the plan. The plan. He was still talking about it like a scheduling failure. Cassidy laughed once, short, bitter, real. "I spent my entire life being told I deserved more than everyone else," she said. "I didn't realize that meant they'd walk me off a cliff if it made them feel important." That was the most honest thing she had ever said about our family. Then she asked for the one thing everyone in this story had assumed I still owed. Rescue. "Can you talk to them? Tell the family I wasn't the only one?" There was fear in the request, but also something new. Shame. I looked at her for a long time. "You weren't the only one," I said, "but I'm not going back into that system to soften consequences for people who built it." She wiped her eyes. "So that's it?" "No," I said. "This is the first honest thing that's happened to us in years." She started crying, quietly this time, without mechanics in it. "I didn't know how bad it was for you," she said. "Because it was good for you," I answered. The truth landed between us and stayed there. I didn't tell her I hated her. I didn't. Hate would have bound me to her more permanently than love ever did. What I told her was the only thing that was actually true. "I'm not trying to ruin you. I'm refusing to keep ruining myself so you can stay comfortable." She nodded slowly, like each word had to pass through years of old family programming before it could register. "I thought you'd always come through," she said. "That's what they always said." "I know," I said. "They told me that too." We sat in silence after that, and for once, silence didn't feel like defeat. It felt like a border. A week later, my parents asked to meet. I said no. Then my father asked to arrange a video call with close family members, maybe 20 people, to address what had happened. I was skeptical, but I joined. The same ecosystem that had watched me be publicly cornered at Thanksgiving now stared back in small squares on a screen. My father looked older than I'd ever seen him. My mother looked like a woman performing humility for the first time in her life and not fully comfortable in the costume. And then, because they had genuinely run out of every other move, they apologized. Not beautifully, not completely, but publicly. My father stated for the record in front of family that I had never agreed to fund the wedding, that financial assumptions had been made in my name without my consent. My mother acknowledged they had involved relatives improperly. Both of them said contacting my employer had been wrong. The call was 9 minutes long. It altered 33 years of family gravity. Afterward, relatives sent me private messages. Some apologized. Some explained why they froze. Some still softened the whole thing. Weddings make people crazy. They were under pressure, and I didn't argue. Minimization is how some people survive proximity to dysfunction, but I also didn't accept any version of events that erased what happened. That was the real change. Not the canceled wedding, not the lost money, not even the public apology. The real change was that I stopped negotiating against my own memory just to keep other people comfortable. As for the aftermath, my parents had to reimburse portions of Tyler's family's expenditures. They absorbed vendor penalties that cost them significantly, including my father selling a classic car he had restored over 7 years to cover outstanding obligations, and my mother canceling a home renovation she had been announcing to her church friends for months. The irony would feel poetic if it weren't so ordinary. The people who spent years treating me like a private emergency fund finally had to finance their own consequences. I moved in February, not dramatically, not out of spite. I took a promotion in Charlotte and leased an apartment on the 4th floor with south-facing windows and a dining table I picked out myself. I invited friends who had never once asked me to earn my seat. I cooked Thanksgiving myself for the first time in my life. Just 4 people, enough food for 8, no contract in sight. It was quiet, a little boring, honestly. It was perfect. Halfway through dessert, I looked around the room and realized something that sounds simple, but took me 33 years to earn. Nobody here was keeping score. Nobody was testing my loyalty. Nobody was engineering a moment. Nobody had a notarized document in their jacket pocket. I had spent so long trying to become acceptable to people committed to misunderstanding me that peace itself felt foreign at first, like a room you keep checking for furniture that isn't there. That's the part I want you to hold on to if you take anything from this. Freedom isn't always a fiery speech in a doorway. Sometimes it's smaller and harder than that. Sometimes it's a quiet apartment, a table you chose, and the simple, radical act of eating dinner without having to earn it first. When people ask me now whether I forgave my family, I give them the honest answer. Forgiveness stopped being the center of the story the day I chose reality over the role they'd written for me. What mattered more was understanding something I should have known at 22 instead of 33. Being the strong one in a family like mine doesn't mean you're strong. It means you're the easiest one to exploit. And the moment you stop carrying what everyone else has quietly loaded onto your back, they will call you cruel, selfish, ungrateful, dramatic. They will call you everything except what you actually are, free. So if you're watching this and you recognize something in Thanksgiving tables, in contracts slid across dinner plates, in people who love you contingently and invoice you quietly, I want you to know this. The most powerful sentence in a family like mine is not, "I forgive you." It's not even "I hate you." It's the one I should have said years earlier, in 100 smaller moments, before it required a 50-person audience and a notarized document to finally make it real. It's just, no. That belongs to me.